Flight attendant slaps a 6-year-old girl the moment she spills a drink in first class. Unaware, her father wields the power to bring the entire airline to its knees. What follows is a chain reaction so explosive that every passenger on board will question how a single act of cruelty could trigger such an earth-shattering twist. But before we dive in, leave a comment and let us know where you are watching from today. And if this story speaks to you, hit that subscribe button for more amazing stories. The opulent lobby of the Silvercrest Luxury Hotel glittered under the light of its cascading crystal chandeliers. A grand piano in the corner played soft jazz, complementing the gentle hum of conversation and the clinking of champagne glasses. Guests arrived by sleek limousines, stepping onto marble floors polished to a mirror-like shine. Staff in impeccable uniforms moved briskly across the lobby, ensuring every detail was flawlessly managed, from the fresh orchids in crystal vases to the chilled towels offered at check-in. But today, this same aura of luxury extended beyond the hotel walls. In a sleek, private corridor leading from the Silver Crest, a select group of travelers was ushered toward a first-class airline lounge. The newly minted Silvercrest Airlines, an exclusive offshoot of the renowned hotel, boasted an air travel experience as lavish as the accommodations on land. Hushed chatter replaced the usual airport bustle, and the clink of silverware on fine porcelain suggested this was no ordinary departure gate. Behind a marble reception desk in the lounge stood Alyssa Beaumont, the airline's senior flight attendant, temporarily assigned to greet high-profile guests. Tall, poised, and impeccably dressed in a tailored uniform with gold trim, Alyssa was known for her strict adherence to airline rules. She never tolerated tardiness, noise, or any disruption to the serene environment Silvercrest Airlines prided itself on. Tonight, a full flight of distinguished passengers was expected, from top CEOs to notable celebrities. Alyssa's keen gaze scanned the lounge, determined to maintain order. The usual pre-flight excitement buzzed in the air. A foreign diplomat chatted quietly on his phone in a corner. A tech magnate in a tailored suit requested a special meal for his restrictive diet. The staff handled each request with soft smiles and a promise of faultless service. Alyssa oversaw every detail with an almost military precision. She thrived on perfection, refusing to let the slightest inconvenience mar the airline's pristine reputation. Suddenly, a subtle disruption rippled across the lounge. A young girl, perhaps 6 years old, with bright eyes and braids, wandered away from the seating area. She wore pink overalls and clutched a small stuffed animal. Though she was clearly trying to be quiet, curiosity got the better of her, and she began tiptoeing around a roped-off display of vintage flight memorabilia. Some passengers noticed her and smiled, but Alyssa's eyes hardened at the sight of this unsupervised child. The girl's name was Rosie Hale, and her innocence radiated in her every step. She leaned forward to examine a golden model airplane under a glass case, accidentally brushing the rope barrier. The stand wobbled slightly, making a soft thump as it resettled on its base. A hush fell over the immediate area. This was exactly the kind of disturbance Alyssa couldn't stand. Alyssa moved in swiftly, ignoring the gentle caution of a fellow flight attendant. She stepped right up to Rosie, her posture towering and intimidating. "Young lady, you can't be here," she said in a stern voice. Rosie looked up, startled. "I'm sorry," the girl whispered, hugging her stuffed toy tightly. "I just wanted to see the airplane." Other passengers began to notice the tension. A few turned away to avoid the awkwardness, while some watched with concern. There was no sign of Rosie's parents or any guardian rushing to her aid. Alyssa's demeanor grew cold as she marched the little girl back toward the seating area. "This is a restricted area. If you can't behave, you shouldn't be flying Silvercrest Airlines." Rosie's lips trembled, but she said nothing. Her wide eyes brimmed with confusion and a tinge of fear. She tried to explain that she'd lost sight of her father in the lounge, but Alyssa was too irritated to listen. Behind them, the lounge pianist paused mid-chord, as if sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere. Unbeknownst to anyone in the lounge, Rosie's father was not an average passenger. He was a man of influence, someone who commanded attention wherever he went. But at this moment, he was momentarily away, finalizing urgent business calls before boarding. Rosie, innocent to the potential drama unfolding around her, could only hope that her dad would appear soon. She had no idea how severely Alyssa detested disruptions, nor did Alyssa realize whose daughter she was scolding. As boarding was announced for Flight 207 to New York, Alyssa led the passengers down a glass-walled corridor, occasionally glancing over her shoulder at Rosie, who was now shuffling quietly. The plane itself was a masterpiece of modern comfort. Plush seats, ambient mood lighting, and the promise of gourmet meals served on fine china. Rosie sat in her assigned seat, glancing wistfully out the window, her pink overalls and stuffed bunny, a stark contrast to the sea of tailored suits and sleek dresses around her. No one had any inkling that the smallest passenger on board would soon be at the center of a brewing storm, one that would challenge Alyssa's rigid control, reveal her worst impulses, and eventually unleash a shocking twist nobody could have foreseen. The door to Flight 207 sealed shut with a resounding thud, the cabin lights dimming to a soothing glow. Passengers settled into their cushioned seats, flight attendants offered drinks in crystal tumblers, and the pilots announced an on-time departure. As the aircraft taxied onto the runway, an air of hushed anticipation enveloped the first-class cabin. This was Silvercrest Airlines, after all. Every person on board expected impeccable service and uninterrupted serenity. Alyssa Beaumont, true to form, took her seat near the cockpit for takeoff, her gaze flicking across each row to ensure compliance. Rosie Hale sat quietly by a window in the second row, hands folded in her lap, her stuffed bunny perched on her knees. Next to her was an empty seat, presumably her father's, though he was nowhere to be seen. Oddly enough, an older gentleman had offered up his own seat so Rosie could have more space, assuming her father was nearby. Alyssa frowned, suspecting the father of this child was careless. She briefly wondered why no one had spoken up as the child boarded alone. Within minutes, the jet soared into a pink-tinged sky, the city lights winking goodbye below. Passengers breathed easier once the seatbelt sign blinked off. Uniformed flight attendants began to weave through the aisles, distributing hot towels and cloth napkins, prepping for the upscale dinner service. Alyssa unbuckled and immediately fixed her attention on Rosie. The young girl gazed out the window, entranced by the cotton candy clouds. Alyssa approached, tension radiating from her posture. "Where is your father?" she demanded in a low tone, mindful of the surrounding VIPs but still firm enough to convey her disapproval. Rosie turned, a bit startled. "He said he was coming, but he had calls to take," she answered softly. "He was here in the lounge. Maybe he'll come after the plane finishes climbing." Alyssa resisted the urge to roll her eyes. "That's not possible, young lady. If he missed the boarding, he'll have to catch a later flight." The notion that such a high-profile seat would be abandoned irritated her. This was Silvercrest Airlines, not some budget carrier. Every seat was at a premium, and a child traveling on her own. Who allowed that? Just then, the dinner service commenced. White tablecloths were unfurled on each passenger's tray table, and the delectable aroma of herb-crusted chicken wafted through the aisles. Rosie's eyes lit up at the sight of the pretty plating, though she struggled to cut her food with the heavy silverware. The flight attendant on cart duty gave her a gentle smile and replaced the adult knife with a smaller, child-friendly utensil. Alyssa hovered, arms crossed, occasionally stepping forward to correct Rosie's seating posture or to scold her for dropping a small piece of bread on the plush aisle carpet. Passengers noticed the tension, some exchanging concerned glances. A soft murmur of conversation passed among them, but no one dared question Alyssa directly. She had a reputation for being strict, but this was edging toward disproportionate. Halfway through the meal, the flight encountered mild turbulence. The cabin lights flickered momentarily. Drinks trembled in their glasses. Rosie's water cup tipped, spilling onto her lap. With a small gasp, Rosie tried to mop up the spill with her napkin, but she only succeeded in pushing the water onto the seat. Irritated, Alyssa sprang forward, ignoring her fellow attendant's suggestion to remain seated with belts fastened until the turbulence subsided. The plane jostled, but Alyssa pressed on, grabbing paper towels and thrusting them at Rosie. "I told you to be careful," she snapped, voice laced with frustration. Rosie's cheeks flamed red as she apologized again and again. Turbulence struck harder just then, causing Alyssa to lose her footing. She stumbled against Rosie's armrest, her frustration compounding. In a moment of sheer, unthinking exasperation, she lashed out. Her open palm met Rosie's cheek with a light but unmistakable slap. Gasps erupted through the cabin. The entire row of passengers froze in shock. Even Alyssa herself seemed stunned by what she had done. Rosie pressed her small hand to her cheek, tears welling up in her wide eyes. A hush spread, so tangible it felt like the plane itself had stopped in midair. No one could believe a professional flight attendant had just slapped a child. For a split second, Alyssa's face registered horror, but pride and anger quickly twisted her features. She regained her composure and stood straight, smoothing her uniform. "Maybe now you'll behave," she muttered under her breath, still loud enough for those nearest to hear. A couple of passengers audibly gasped, while others fumbled for their phones, unsure if they should record or intervene. Little did Alyssa know she had just made the gravest mistake of her career and of her life, because that quiet, unassuming 6-year-old was no ordinary passenger. Her father was someone with the clout to demand accountability of even the highest executives, and he was about to make an appearance in a way no one on that flight would ever forget. A tense silence hung in the air as the plane continued its bumpy path. Alyssa, her cheeks burning with adrenaline and mortification, turned away from Rosie, not fully grasping the gravity of her actions. The other flight attendants looked on, unsure how to react. Some of them appeared frightened. Others betrayed anger or disbelief. After all, a flight attendant slapping a child was unthinkable, especially aboard Silvercrest Airlines, a company that prided itself on pampering its elite clientele. Rosie sat rooted in her seat, tears brimming but not yet falling. She clutched her stuffed bunny against her cheek, as though trying to erase the sting. The father's seat beside her remained empty, yet a palpable aura of impending confrontation loomed in that vacant space. Passengers cast wary glances, some shaking their heads in silent disapproval. Yet no one spoke up, perhaps assuming the father would arrive or that flight security would intervene. Moments later, a crisp, authoritative voice crackled over the cabin's intercom. "This is Captain Evans. We're experiencing temporary turbulence, but we'll be ascending to a smoother altitude shortly. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." His calm, professional tone only highlighted how anything but calm the first-class cabin had become. Whispers buzzed among the passengers like an electrical current. Suddenly, a tall figure appeared from behind the cockpit area, stepping into the aisle with measured grace. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, and though his expression was composed, his eyes flashed with concern. His name was Nicholas Hale, Rosie's father, and a key investor in several high-profile ventures, including the very airline they were flying on. Due to the urgency of last-minute paperwork, he'd been invited to discuss crucial business matters with the pilot before takeoff, which had caused his unusual absence at boarding. Nicholas paused momentarily, scanning the cabin. His gaze fell upon Rosie, who was trembling, tears rolling down her cheeks. Immediately, he rushed to her side. "Rosie, my angel, what happened?" he asked, voice warm but tinged with worry. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came, only a sob. Nicholas gently touched her cheek, noticing the faint outline of a handprint. The sight ignited a flicker of alarm in his eyes. He turned, looking for a flight attendant to provide answers. A hush fell over the passengers, all eyes now on the father and daughter. Alyssa hovered near the galley, trying to appear busy, but her rigid posture betrayed her anxiousness. Another attendant, sensing the tension, quickly emerged, stepping between Nicholas and Alyssa, as if to absorb the brunt of the confrontation. With quiet resolve, Nicholas addressed the other attendant. "My daughter's cheek is red. She's upset. Someone tell me what happened." His voice was measured, but a tremor of anger rippled just beneath the surface. Rosie sniffled and pointed a small finger in Alyssa's direction. Several passengers nodded, affirming Rosie's silent accusation. Alyssa swallowed hard. She could feel the entire cabin's judgment bearing down on her. Summoning the last shred of her composure, she stepped forward and spoke in a quivering but resolute tone. "Your daughter was causing a disturbance. I was trying to discipline her. Her attempt at sounding authoritative fell flat, overshadowed by a blatant wave of guilt." Nicholas's expression darkened, and for a moment he just stared at Alyssa. "Discipline?" he echoed. The single word dripped with controlled outrage. Rosie's tearful face spoke volumes more than any explanation could. "Is it company policy to strike a minor?" he asked, voice eerily calm, but each syllable razor-sharp. Alyssa opened her mouth to respond, but words eluded her. She knew no policy existed to justify physical force against a passenger, especially a child. An uneasy hush blanketed first class. Even the hum of the engines seemed distant, overshadowed by the weight of the moment. Some passengers discreetly recorded the interaction, anticipating a headline-worthy meltdown. Trying to regain control, Alyssa mustered a stiff nod toward Nicholas. She spilled water and nearly caused an accident," she stammered. "I lost my balance in the turbulence. It wasn't intentional." Nicholas inhaled slowly, as though counting to 10. He was a man whose investments and reputation could make or break an airline. He also happened to be a protective father who cherished his only child. The perfect storm of personal betrayal and professional disappointment glinted in his eyes. "So you slapped my little girl because she spilled water during turbulence?" or he asked, each word hammered by quiet disbelief. Alyssa's lips quivered. She realized the severity of her mistake. Her entire career, her immaculate record of exemplary service, now hung by a thread. She looked around, seeking any kind of backup from her fellow crew members, but they all stared at their shoes or busied themselves with tasks, unwilling to defend the indefensible. In the seat behind Rosie, an older woman wearing a designer coat rose halfway, placing a hand on Nicholas's shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Hale," she whispered. "We all saw it. The turbulence threw her off, but she shouldn't have touched your child." Rosie sniffled. Nicholas knelt down and hugged her gently. "No one has the right to lay a hand on you," he whispered to his daughter. Then, squaring his shoulders, he faced Alyssa. The tension in the cabin skyrocketed, some passengers holding their breaths, waiting for the explosion of anger. Surprisingly, Nicholas's voice remained dangerously calm. "I'm going to need you to step away. Now we will speak about this further once we land." He didn't raise his tone or threaten. He didn't have to. The power he wielded was evident in every syllable. Another flight attendant quickly stepped in, guiding Alyssa toward the back of the cabin, effectively removing her from Rosie's sight. Yet the turmoil was far from over. The fasten seatbelt sign lit up again as the plane dipped slightly, searching for smoother skies. Passengers exchanged glances as they felt they'd just witnessed a calm before an even bigger storm. Nicholas Hale's reputation as a magnanimous but exacting businessman preceded him. If Alyssa thought a quiet apology could mend this moment, she was mistaken. In a hushed, trembling whisper, Rosie glanced up at her father. "I just wanted to see the view, Daddy," she said, tears drying on her lashes. He stroked her hair, soothing her. "I know, baby. It's okay. We'll make sure this never happens again." Around them, rows of eyes pretended to watch the seatback screens, but their attention was clearly stolen by this father-daughter scene. If only they knew the chain reaction set in motion, the upcoming confrontation, the investigation that would inevitably follow, and the final twist that would reveal exactly how formidable Nicholas Hale truly was. The plane continued on, suspended 30,000 feet above the ground, carrying with it shock, betrayal, and a sense of foreboding. Little did anyone realize that the consequences of Alyssa's snap decision were about to reverberate far beyond this single flight. And though the flight would eventually land, this story was just beginning, its most dramatic chapters and astonishing revelations still waiting on the horizon. Despite the tension in the first-class cabin, Flight 207 cruised on through patchy clouds, chasing the fading light of dusk. A forced calm seemed to settle over the passengers, many of whom spoke in hushed murmurs, stealing glances at Rosie and her father. Nicholas Hale. Even as the cabin lights dimmed to a gentle glow for the overnight portion of the flight, a thin undercurrent of disbelief crackled just beneath the surface. Everyone knew something big was about to happen, something far beyond a spilled drink or a bit of turbulence. Alyssa Beaumont, still reeling from her impulsive action, hovered near the rear of the first-class section. She kept her arms folded, posture rigid, as though bracing for a confrontation. Her fellow flight attendants avoided her gaze, uncertain how to respond to what they'd witnessed. The flight purser, an older woman with kind eyes, discreetly spoke to Alyssa in a low whisper, warning her that disciplinary steps would be inevitable. Alyssa swallowed hard, sensing the walls closing in around her carefully cultivated career. Meanwhile, Nicholas leaned down to Rosie, gently wiping her tears. She had stopped crying but wore an expression of confusion and lingering hurt. "We'll be landing soon," he promised softly, though in reality they were several hours from their final destination. "Try to rest, sweetheart. I'll take care of everything." Rosie nodded, nestling against the window, clutching her stuffed bunny tight. Her small shoulders still trembled with the aftershock of Alyssa's slap. Nicholas's eyes gleamed with both anger and resolve. No one, regardless of rank or seniority, would lay a hand on his daughter and walk away unscathed. After summoning one of the more junior attendants, Nicholas quietly made his request. He wanted immediate contact with the airline's ground staff. Confused, the attendant explained that the onboard Wi-Fi couldn't handle video calls right now, but Nicholas simply handed over a sleek satellite phone he carried for emergencies. His voice dropped to a level that no one else could overhear. Within minutes, a hushed conversation unfolded in the galley, the words CEO, investigation, and stakeholder meeting drifting into the air. Passengers craned their necks, trying to interpret what was happening. The older gentleman behind Rosie, the one who had graciously offered his seat earlier, felt a twist of pity for Alyssa, but also believed that justice had to be served. A child was sacred, especially one as polite and sweet as Rosie. Suddenly, a ripple of alarm shivered through the cabin as the plane lurched again. The seatbelt sign blinked on with a chime. Passengers fumbled to secure trays and drinks. An announcement from the captain informed them of unexpected headwinds, forcing a slight change en route. But everyone suspected that more than wind was at play. Alyssa's composure began to crack further. She realized that Nicholas Hale was more than just a protective father. He was a powerful man with direct ties to the airline. She'd seen the internal memos referencing Hale Investments, rumored to be the major financial backer for Silvercrest Airlines. If the rumors were true, Nicholas Hale was no mere passenger. He was practically the passenger. The junior attendant handed the phone back to Nicholas, nodding respectfully. Nicholas ended the call, his expression calm but resolute, and returned to Rosie's side. His presence radiated a quiet authority that even the unsettled travelers could sense. Some said nothing, others offered sympathetic nods, recognizing that a silent storm was brewing. The flight made steady progress across the nighttime sky, the roar of the engines masking the whispered conversations in the aisle. Through it all, Rosie clung to her bunny, her eyes drifting closed in fitful rest. Alyssa stood stiffly against the cabin wall, praying that the next few hours would pass without further incident. She had no idea how wrong she was, for in that moment, the seeds of an extraordinary confrontation had already taken root. The phone call Nicholas placed was far from casual. It was a directive to Silvercrest Airlines' highest-ranking officials, instructing them to prepare for an emergency meeting upon arrival. And so the flight pressed on, carrying not just wealthy executives and luxury travelers, but a saga of regret and looming reckoning, one that would finally land in the bright lights of the runway. Hours later, dawn broke across the horizon, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks. Flight 207 began its descent into New York, the seatbelt sign illuminating one final time as the plane angled toward the bustling metropolis below. Passengers sat upright, tidying away blankets and adjusting tray tables. Rosie blinked sleepily, stirring from a restless nap. She rubbed her eyes, her small face still marked with faint sadness. Nicholas Hale gently guided Rosie's seatbelt, making sure she was secure. Then he looked forward, his gaze focused on the doors leading to the cockpit. Alyssa had vanished into the galley, presumably to finalize arrival procedures. A hush lingered in the cabin, the last minutes of flight drawing out like a held breath. Everyone sensed that whatever consequences lay ahead would soon be set in motion. At long last, the plane touched down with a smooth glide. Applause broke out among some travelers who felt relief at having arrived safely after the unsettling tension. But for a handful of people, Nicholas, Rosie, and Alyssa included, this was only the start of a new, more daunting chapter. The door opened, and the brisk morning air wafted in, accompanied by the whir of the airport ramp. As soon as passengers disembarked into the private corridor designated for Silvercrest Airlines Elite, a small crowd of well-dressed airport staff awaited them. Among them stood Evelyn Braxton, the airline's chief operating officer, flanked by two stern-faced individuals who appeared to be in security or legal roles. Their eyes scanned the exiting passengers until they found Nicholas and Rosie. Evelyn approached them immediately. "Mr. Hale," she said softly, nodding in greeting. Her anxious gaze darted to Rosie, noting the faint mark on her cheek. "I'm so sorry for what happened. We've arranged a private lounge where we can discuss the next steps." She offered a gentle smile to the little girl. Rosie, still clutching her bunny, managed a polite nod. Nicholas responded with a curt, "Thank you." His voice betrayed a swirl of emotions: anger, disappointment, and protectiveness. He moved forward, and the staff guided him toward a soundproof executive lounge, stepping aside to avoid the swirl of cameras and smartphones that some curious onlookers had already pulled out in the terminal. Behind them, Alyssa emerged, her uniform neat but her face drawn. She clutched her travel documents, stepping off the plane with trepidation. Before she could attempt a discreet exit, she heard an authoritative voice call her name. Turning around, she came face to face with one of the legal officers standing beside Evelyn Braxton. The officer's expression said it all. There was no slipping away from this. In the executive lounge, Nicholas and Rosie sat on a plush leather couch. Evelyn poured them glasses of water, her hands shaking slightly. "We take this incident very seriously," she began, choosing her words carefully. "We've already contacted our legal team and the board of directors. We want to make this right, for you, Mr. Hale, and especially for your daughter." Nicholas nodded, keeping a hand on Rosie's shoulder. He spoke calmly, though each word carried the gravity of a final verdict. "My daughter was assaulted by a member of your cabin crew," he said. "I expect thorough accountability, and I want to be sure no other child goes through this." As if on cue, Alyssa was escorted into the lounge, standing stiffly near the door. She swallowed hard, eyes downcast, every inch of her posture screaming remorse and fear. Gone was the imperious flight attendant who barked orders in the lounge and aisle. In her place stood a woman facing the consequences of an indefensible choice. A long silence stretched between them. Rosie looked up at Alyssa, her innocent gaze reflecting a mix of hurt and confusion. Finally, Nicholas sighed. "Rosie," he said gently, "do you want to say anything?" The little girl hesitated, then her voice came out faint but clear. "You scared me," she whispered, fixing her eyes on Alyssa. "I didn't mean to spill the water. I was just scared of the turbulence." Alyssa's eyes filled with tears. She opened her mouth, struggling to speak. I'm so sorry," she managed, voice trembling. I let my frustration get the better of me. I never should have." She broke off, unable to finish. Evelyn cleared her throat. "We will take immediate disciplinary action. Alyssa, you're suspended, effective right now, pending a formal investigation. Your access to Silvercrest Airlines facilities will be revoked, and you are not to contact any passenger regarding this incident." Alyssa nodded numbly, tears tracing her cheeks. She looked at Rosie one more time. "I truly am sorry," she repeated in a broken whisper. Then she bowed her head, allowing security personnel to escort her from the room. Silence reigned in her absence. Evelyn apologized again, promising Nicholas they would coordinate any further legal or personal needs. "We value our partnership with Hale Investments," she said quietly, "but more than that, we value your trust. We hope we can earn it back." Nicholas glanced down at Rosie, who squeezed his hand. Then he spoke, his tone a mix of resolution and a hint of compassion. "We'll see," he replied. "It's not about business. It's about ensuring that no one else's child gets hurt." Rosie exhaled softly, relief washing over her small face, now that everything was out in the open. In that moment, as father and daughter stood to leave, a subtle hush filled the lounge. The staff parted to let them pass, each person wearing an expression that ranged from sorrow to respect. Beyond the tinted lounge doors, the rest of the airport went about its usual rhythms, passengers rushing to gates, announcements echoing overhead. Yet for those involved in Flight 207's unsettling drama, life had irrevocably changed. Alyssa Beaumont's once spotless record lay shattered, a cautionary tale about how a single lapse in judgment can unravel a career. Nicholas Hale, a man of both power and empathy, emerged not only as a protective father, but as a guardian of principled conduct. And little Rosie, still clutching her bunny, left the airport holding her father's hand. having learned a lesson she shouldn't have had to learn so soon. That sometimes, even in the safest places, one act of cruelty can break trust in an instant. And so the story ends, with the memory of a slap echoing through the rafters of Silvercrest Airlines, a stark reminder that beneath even the most luxurious surfaces lie moments that test our humanity. Alyssa's fate remained uncertain, subject to investigations in the court of public opinion. But for Rosie and Nicholas, father and daughter, the ordeal welded their bonds stronger than ever. Kindness, empathy, and accountability shone through in the final hours, transcending first-class perks and corporate alliances, proving that true decency is what sets us apart, no matter how high we fly.